This FIFA president Gianni Infantino has threatened Simon a TV blackouts of this summer's Women's World Cup in the UK and Europe unless broadcasters increase their offers for the rights. Now, to get into this, the BBC and ITV are in talks about sharing the rights for the tournament in Australia and New Zealand in July and August, but are believed to have offered about 9 million quid. Broadcasters in Italy, Spain, Germany, France have offered even less. But Infantino says those amounted to between $1 and $10 million, £8 million at most for the rights, compared to 100 to 200 million for the Men's World Cup. So in other words, is Infantino moving into kind of blackmail territory, or is this just purely a form of hard negotiation? Get real, or else there'll be a blackout of the tournament here in Europe. We're going to speak to former England and Chelsea women's striker Eni Aluko on this in a second, but let's hear Infantino on this perceived boycott threat.
We did the first step at FIFA by increasing significantly the prize money, and our objective is to reach the equal pay situation in the next World Cup. But broadcasters, especially public broadcasters funded by taxpayers' money, should put their action behind their words, because they rightfully criticize football organizations or other sports organizations for not paying equally women and men, or not having the same prize money. Well, we need to generate these revenues, and they should help us, because otherwise we'll simply not sell these rights at these undervalued prices to them. And, well, the European public will not be able to watch the Women's World Cup, which after the success of the last tournament in France, after the success of the Euro, would be really, really a pity.
So that was Infantino, the top man at FIFA, basically saying, look, when it comes to the Men's World Cup, the broadcasters in the UK and Europe dig deep and fork out big time. So why not do the same when it comes to the Women's World Cup? And if you don't, we might just have a TV blackout of the action. Former England and Chelsea women's striker Eni Aluko joins us live. Eni, good morning. Is Infantino right in this?
Good morning, Jim. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning.
No, I think Infantino is playing negotiation tactics here. I think what he fails to understand is that when the World Cup was put in Australia and New Zealand, clearly the broadcast times are going to be between 7 and 11 a.m., particularly for the best games, the England games.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, those broadcast slots cannot sell commercially, cannot justify commercially. So, I'm an ITV pundit, cannot justify commercially what a Men's World Cup would. So the bids that they're getting are commensurate to obviously what ITV can sell in those slots.
Yes,
BBC, I'm not sure, is a different scenario, but I think it's commendable what he's saying in terms of we want to get to equal pay, etc. But the reality is they've chosen to put the World Cup in Australia and New Zealand, which makes it very difficult for where the biggest audiences are, which is USA and Europe. 1.2 billion viewers watched in France 2019. So the appetite's there if you put it on at the right time. We saw in Qatar as well, the amount of people that watched, because the times were good to watch it. I think there's been a bit of a mistake as well from FIFA, where this is the first time they've sold the women's rights separately from the men. I think it should have been bundled together when they sold the Men's World Cup, because they probably would have got more value. So
I tell you what, Eni, Simon, I see you nodding there to what Eni's saying.
Well,
so many
right.
good points in there, aren't they?
Well,
First of all, the geographical situation.
Well, yeah. I mean, ultimately, what he's trying to leverage is the culture of promoting women's football and the need for diversity and inclusion, and the value of women's football, and the idea that women's football needs to be funded the same way that's men's. It's very easy. If you want to award the World Cup in a space where the broadcasters don't attach the same value to it, and you want women's international football to be equal pay, then take some of the profits that you got from the last World Cup, take some of the profits you're going to get from the USA-Mexico Cup, and drop it into the funding of women's football, rather than try and guilt trip or leverage the idea of women's football through the broadcasters who cannot attach the same commercial value to it for the very reasons that Eni's just laid out, right? I had assumed that Eni would go a different way with this conversation, and that my assumption was wrong, because it's a very balanced and correct way of looking at it.
Yeah.
This is not about undermining women's football. It's not about men's football being more prevalent. It's about the reality of a whole raft of things. And Infantino is playing all ends against the middle. If he wants to play that game of equal pay, which is absolutely right, if the commercial values of women's football is as valuable as men, then there should be no dispute about the reality of what people get paid. Currently, the deals that are available aren't allowing that. So if you want to get to that end game, you can take some of the immense profits that has come from the FIFA World Cup. When it became the FIFA World Cup,
Yes,
I don't know.
yeah,
They've
yeah.
hijacked the tournament, FIFA.
Yes.
And drop it into women's international football and fund the difference for the choices that you've made in awarding World Cups.
He's playing a dangerous game, Eni, to an extent here, by virtually, seemingly threatening a TV blackout in this part of the world.
But I believe that... Sorry.
He is.
On you go, Eni.
Sorry.
Carlton will come in a second.
Yeah, I think it's a negotiation tactic. I think that obviously the other European countries may not have agreed as well. But ultimately, I know with ITV, I've worked with ITV for a long time. ITV have got the rights to England Lionesses. So there's not a case of not wanting to invest in women's football, but they have to justify it based on where the World Cup is. I mean, I went to Australia in January. It was a nightmare. It was so far. People can, so far to get to. And the games are going to be at really difficult times. So I think that there has to be a value proposition based on that. But I do hope it gets sorted out, because the public do want to watch women's football, particularly when it's on the international stage.
Yes, indeed. I mean, they made a rod for their own back, where they're staging it.
Again, I think it will get sorted. It's reported that the BBC and ITV are close to doing a deal. He's just playing a bit of Russian roulette.
Culturally, the BBC have got lots to say about the way society should be held together, and what is wrong and what is right about the various isms in society. So they should be at the front of the queue, given this is taxpayer money and funded by a different methodology than the commercial businesses like ITV. So they should be being able to bid, given the nature of women's football, given they're a major supporter of it and a major campaigner for it, and rightly so, given they're the broadcaster that is funded by the state and represents the state, they should come to the table and pay the prerequisite amount of money, and Infantino should negotiate the best deal he can. And if there's a gap between his ultimate outcome of equal pay, or then FIFA will have to bridge that gap.
Absolutely.
They've got plenty of money in Switzerland.
I don't think Simon's wrong in that, Eni. I think he's spot on.
Well, I think that's what's happened. I think ITV and BBC would have put their value proposition forward based on, again, I can't speak for BBC, but based on, our ITV obviously sell their flights as a commercial broadcaster. Whether that, that's obviously very far away from the 100 and 200 million that they sell for the Men's World Cup. But again, I go back to it. You put it in Australia and New Zealand, which I think will be brilliant. But it is going to cause problems in terms of when people can watch and when they can justify advertising in that time slot. So, he has to kind of understand that it is going to be less.
But he also is aware of what Simon's saying, right? Is that if ITV and the BBC have bid 9 million, he's going to have to plug the gap. So that's why he's trying to get more money out of them.
But we also must be contextual, and it's not controversial here. There is a false equivalency. There are timelines in other World Cups, like South Africa, that would have impacted upon schedules.
Yeah.
So this is also, with due respect, and this might not be the most popular of comments that I'll make, there is a difference between the current value of women's football and men's football.
Yeah.
So the equivalency argument that people should get paid the same amount of money in the commercial does, it's a false equivalency to say that the World Cup rights being sold for hundreds of millions of pounds from the men's World Cup immediately translates to, at this stage in the women's evolution, that the equivalency is that that's a benchmark, because it's not.
Having said that, according to FIFA figures, Eni, as you'll know, 1.12 billion viewers tuned in to the 2019 Women's World Cup in France across all platforms. So there's more than a big appetite for it.
Well, the key word is it was in France. Lots of people were able to watch it, and that's my point. So I disagree slightly with what Simon said there. There isn't an equivalency, of course. There isn't the same amount of value. But, it's the women's game has accelerated dramatically over the last 10 years, to the point where the last World Cup was watched by 1.2 billion people. But geographically, FIFA have to make sure in their bid to sort of take football around the world, they are thinking about the commercial value of the rights geographically where that's going to have an impact. And I think Australia and New Zealand,
But I
probably
think
haven't thought about that.
But I think even at this moment in time, I think it will get to parity. But even at this moment in time, geographically, if it was in a better location, it still wouldn't get the same amount of money as the men's game. You know, we've got to get there. Yeah, we've got to get there. But, you know, we're still not at that point yet.
Yeah.
Well, that's why, Carlton, I say that I think the rights should be packaged together with the men's game. So when
I totally agree with you.
You know, when ITV are bidding for Qatar World Cup, they should have already put their bid in for the Women's World Cup, because naturally it would drive the value up. So I commend the fact that FIFA are trying to sell it separately, but I think that's where there's been a value drop off.
Eni, I can't let you go without a quick word on Chelsea. So sorry to throw that into the mix. Your former club, your beloved Chelsea. They cannot buy a win under Frank Lampard. It seems there's desperation abounding around the football club. Chelsea almost unrecognisable, Eni, from the club we thought was going to get through a highly successful season to the one we're looking at now.
Totally unrecognisable, Jim. Totally unrecognisable. And it's just, I think now you've got to look at the players. You cannot say Graham Potter and Frank Lampard. You've got to look at the players. And I'm looking at, and I hate to do this as a former player because, I'll always be the one to defend players. But looking at the players last night, it's not acceptable. They look like a group of players that have nothing to play for. And the amount you care is directly related to the amount you run, the amount you tackle, the repeated movements. It just wasn't there. It's so passive. And I'm sure that, they can't wait to get to the end of the season. But something has to happen. I'm really hoping Pochettino gets announced soon so that at least some of the players will go, right, okay, we've got a new start from the end of the season. But it just looks like a group of players that don't care. And it's really sad to see.
It's almost inconceivable, Eni, to hear you speak like that. And this is Chelsea. We spent 600 million.
But I think that 600 million didn't come with a plan. I mean, we've seen this season what a plan and strategy can do. Brentford, Brighton, Fulham, Newcastle. These clubs, they spend their money according to a plan and a strategy. And I just don't think that Chelsea have necessarily done that. And I think the players have sussed that out as well. It's sad. It's sad to see, but the players have to, Frank Lampard somehow has to get a tune out of them before the end of the season, because it is looking like they're not going to pick up a point between now and the end of the season.
It's quite unbelievable, isn't it? Eni Aluko, as always, thank you so much for your contribution, which is as significant as we always knew it to be. Former England and Chelsea women's striker Eni joined us live this morning. We're coming up to 11:45.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.